So to begin tonight, Ms. Loren, for 1 minute.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Lauren, and I'm representing the Conservative Party of Canada. I immigrated as a child of 4 from Berlin, Germany with my parents, and we settled in West Vancouver. I grew up in this riding, I raised my family in this riding, and I started and still have my business in this riding. I'm a chartered professional accountant by trade and a small business owner by heart. I teach financial literacy to children, teenagers, and business tax to small business owners. I most recently retired as a board member from the Lionsgate Hospital Foundation and the West Vancouver Chamber of Commerce. Our platform is all about making money more affordable, or making life more affordable for you by putting more money into your pocket. I'm hoping that by answering today's questions, we'll be able to identify how we can make life more affordable for you and for all of us here in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Loren. Dana Taylor, of the Green Party of Canada.
Yes, good evening all, and hello Roberts Creek. My name is Dana Taylor with the Green Party of Canada. I've been an activist and an advocate for most of my life. Through my work in North Vancouver and Lower Lonsdale, helping to bring a waterfront park to that city. With a Safe House Sound Society many years ago to stop the pollution of the 2 pulp mills and eventually lead to the cleanup of Britannia Beach. To trade missions in China to find markets for environmental protection equipment and builders opportunities. To starting the BC Green Chamber of Commerce to enable sustainable businesses to find new markets for their services. And in 2017, my run for the BC Green Party in West Vancouver Sea to Sky country. I live in West Vancouver. I was born and raised in Midtown Toronto, but I chose to live in British Columbia. I chose to run for the Green Party of Canada because I want to ensure that there is a future for our children and all of mankind. The greatest threat to our safety...
Thank you, Dan. Sorry, that was a rude minute. Mr. Terry Grimwood, running as an independent.
Good evening. My name is Terry Grimwood. I'm born and raised in North Vancouver. Been living on the coast here for 20 years, and I was a residential builder and naval architect here for the last 20 years in Seychelles. I live on Porpoise Bay, and Canada Fresh is a new party. We've been across the country 3 times in the last 12 months, and we're getting support in every province. One of our platforms for rural Canada is to have, I call it Transit Plus, and it would provide every 50 kilometers to 100 kilometers a network of social houses, which I call pubs. And they'd be 24-hour restaurants, washrooms, showers, computer terminals, laundry facilities, postal, helicopter, storage for transport, emergency needs, and policing. And Roberts Creek qualifies to be a hub. And it would support tourism here in the summer months for people riding their bikes. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Moving on, Patrick Weiler, the Liberal Party.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Weiler. I'm the Liberal Party of Canada for the riding. Grew up in between West Vancouver and Seychelles, where my mother was a municipal councillor. I come from a legal background. I practice primarily in environmental and Aboriginal law, work with clients throughout the province, and I've done a lot of international development work as well. So I've worked for the United Nations Development Program and a number of other agencies on projects helping countries better manage international water bodies and on helping countries bring in more modern regulations for the mining sector. So I'm 33, and I'm so happy to see that we have a debate where we have our generation coming out to engage in politics. I think that's so important, and a lot of the issues that I'm running on are issues that I know the Liberal Party has a strong platform on to address issues for our generation. That's on growing the economy, making life more affordable for us, for families, for students, and also having a strong plan to protect the environment and fight climate change. So I'm looking forward to talking about that this evening.
Thank you, Patrick. Moving on to Ms. Judith Wilson of the NDP.
Hi, my name is Judith Wilson. I'm your NDP candidate in this riding. I live on the coast, just outside of Langdale, on a little hobby farm. I started my political activity when I was just a young person, faced with a world that was dominated by the fear regarding nuclear obliteration. I got involved with the NDP because they were the people in Ottawa who were fighting the same battles there that I was fighting on the streets of Vancouver. Today, it's climate change that is on everyone's lips, and I'm in it for change and the NDP is in it as well. I'm proud to be the candidate for the NDP because they are the party of progressive political change. They are a party that has consistently fought for the people as opposed to corporate and wealthy interests. The NDP was the author of Canada's proudest achievements in social policy, bringing forth Medicare, bringing forth pensions, bringing forth unemployment insurance, at times when you have a minority government.
Thank you, Judith Wilson. Mr. Doug Bebb of the People's Party of Canada.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Douglas Bebb. I'm a candidate for the People's Party of Canada. The PPC was formed a little over a year ago and is now running 315 confirmed candidates right across Canada. We are the fastest growing party in Canadian history. I am a professional mechanical engineer and a BA both from UBC. I entered politics in April because the opportunity presented by the People's Party is rare and must be embraced. A People's Party government will protect free speech and all other freedoms guaranteed to Canadians by our Constitution. John Diefenbaker said it best: I am a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship God in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to choose those who govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind. To uphold our heritage of freedom, Canada must remain
Thank you,
strong.
Mr. Bebb. Moving on to Gordon Jeffrey of the Rhinoceros Party.
These clowns are going to try to insult your intelligence and pull the wool over your eyes. Don't be fooled. The Rhino's main promise has always been not to keep any of our promises, but since the Liberal Party has co-opted that to the point where we can't compete, my promise is all truth all the time and partisan representation of the people. It's nice to hear the Conservatives have made an impressive foray into robotics. It was nice to hear the Conbot 3000 delivering its scripted and coached intro for the 4th time. They hope our memories are capped at 4 years, while the Libs hope it's capped at 2 weeks. The Aga conflict of interest, the Norman case, SNC Lavalin, Gropegate, blackface, cardboard water bottles, the India trip. I could go on. Then we have the NDP, or as I like to call them, the Nonsense and Deficits Party, with their platform half stolen from other parties, trying to ride the coattails of the Greens during their climate emergency. I've seen their economic plan, and I hate to break it to them, but I'm afraid monopoly money isn't legal tender. Red, blue, orange, it's all brown. Flush it down.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. So moving on, thank you all the candidates for your opening statements, and thank you for keeping it short. The first question that we pulled from our pool today, and the first opportunity to respond to it will go to Ms. Loren of the Conservative Party of Canada. And the question is as follows. The 2019 Canadian Rental Housing Index found that nearly a quarter of renters under 30 are at what the index defines as a crisis level of spending, with half or more of their income going towards monthly rental payments. How will you increase the availability of affordable housing for young adults and young families looking to live on the Sunshine Coast? Ms. Loren.
I have a 26-year-old daughter who just finished university and is dying to move out. She can't afford it because over 50% of her income would go to rental housing. You're not the only ones. We are all suffering the lack of rental housing across the board. The Conservative Party has planned to use excess surplus federal lands to build housing. 2/3 of the cost of your property goes to land. By using that to make the build housing, we will be able to have the housing we need. Unfortunately, it'll probably be another 3 to 5 years.
Thank you very much. Next opportunity to answer, Mr. Dana Taylor.
Green Party of Canada has suggested a proposal to review the national housing strategy to put focus on co-op, co-housing, and alternative housing, as well as to add $1.5 billion to the housing to review and make available affordable housing to the 1.7 million families that qualify for it. This would include housing in different forms. It would also include bringing all homeowners, all landowners together to enable that to occur and to be able to monitor and work with different projects, private and public, to make the land available to enable the housing to be built. It's necessary right across this riding, therefore it's important that it be provided in all forms across. The focus should not be on home ownership, it should be on safe, secure, available housing when and where it's needed.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Next opportunity to answer, Mr. Terry Grimwood.
Canada Fresh and Terry Grimwood are the only people in all of Canada. There's no one in any other riding raising the issue that I'm raising with you right now. Canada has $1 trillion in our pension funds invested offshore. People aren't listening. $1 billion. Not a billion, $1,000 billion invested offshore. That money, if it was invested in Canada, would be building the housing for seniors, students, low-income families. We have the money. We just have to invest it in Canada. You have to believe in Canada. Canada first. Canada Fresh. I'm seeing these two gentlemen, and it's going to be one of the three of us, and I'm in the middle right now, so that means I'm going to win. And I have the money, and I'll buy you a beer.
Thank you, Mr. Terry Grimwood. Next opportunity to answer, Mr. Patrick Weiler.
So I think addressing the housing crisis is one of the biggest priorities we have to address right now. And we're living in one of the most unaffordable ridings in the entire country. And for many people in my generation, the idea of home ownership is completely out of reach. And so rental housing is just, it's going to be the most realistic opportunity for a lot of us. And we've created a 10-year, $55 billion national housing strategy so we can increase the stock of housing that's available. And a big portion of that will be focused on building specific market rental places. So we had a $7.3 million investment in Whistler for market rental housing there. We need that here, and we can do that by providing federal lands, as we did in Gibson's for housing. But it's also going to take concerted efforts working with the federal government, the province, with municipalities to identify areas that we can do that. And then we have low-cost loans we can give to help build them.
Thank you, Mr. Weiler. Next opportunity goes to Judith Wilson at the NDP.
Well, there's two emergencies. There's the climate emergency and there's the housing emergency. We need to make housing like a major focus. And in the NDP, the platform calls for the construction of 500,000 new rental units. But as Ms. Lauren has told you, these things don't happen instantly. So in the meantime, we need to get some help to the people that are struggling so desperately. So the party has called for there to be a $5,000, up to a $5,000 tax credit or renter's grant to those people who are paying 30% or more of their income towards their rent. So that would go into place pretty much immediately. In addition, we'd like to see a foreign tax so that we could stop the increasing cost of property as a result of the jacking up of prices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next opportunity goes to Mr. Duff.
Well, a minute's not long to solve any housing crisis. I'm going to finish my introductory statement. To uphold our heritage of freedom, Canada must remain strong. This includes financial strength and balanced budgets and low national debt. The PPC is the only party committed to a balanced budget in 2 years. Housing is a provincial jurisdiction. Transportation is a provincial jurisdiction. Delivery of health care is a provincial jurisdiction. The other parties all know this, but it won't stop them from making a bunch of false promises. They will say anything to get elected. The People's Party will respect the division of powers laid out in our Constitution. This is something that Jagmeet Singh apparently does not understand. Neither, apparently, does Mr. Singh understand that free speech is an essential cornerstone of Canadian democracy. About a minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bev. Next opportunity goes to Gordon Jeffrey of the Ryan Party.
Thank you. I support a first-time homebuyers tax credit. I support a very steep increase in foreign buyers tax, and I support providing incentives to build proper affordable housing, not the dorm-style housing for temporary foreign workers that they keep building in my hometown of Whistler. Currently, incentives favor producing million-dollar condos, not apartment buildings or smaller housing like we actually need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question. The first opportunity to answer goes to Mr. Dan Taylor of the Green Party of Canada. What steps will you and your party take to transition to a green economy?
Thank you. Mission Possible, which is the original document, came out prior to the election platform, basically spells out a 20-point plan to enable a transition off fossil fuels, getting rid of all subsidies to fossil fuel industry, improving the availability of electric vehicles, transitioning our grid system to make it available across the country, and to make connectivity across the country, planting a huge tree planting program, retrofitting of all buildings, buildings both public and private, both access to it, leaving fossil fuels in the ground with LNG and bitumen, so to enable that we can then move, and then growing the new economy through innovation, new jobs in the renewable energy resource sector, jobs that are available at a 5-to-1 ratio to those available in the gas and oil industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dan Taylor. Next opportunity goes to Terry Grimwood.
Hello, can you hear me? I've been using the neighbor's mic, so I have to make sure it's working. I want to build a floating bridge to the Sunshine Coast and to Vancouver Island. I've been across the country 3 times, and when you go to PEI and you go across the Confederation Bridge and you read about the climate benefits of having that bridge built, you can't deny it. It's the future. They say there's not enough population here to support a bridge, and I disagree. I look at the number of man hours that are lost every day by having to line up for the ferries and keep your fingers crossed. I just think that the funds are there. It's part of our highway system. The federal government needs to step up and do it. I want to see one from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland as well. I call it the Iceberg Bridge. It has 12 islands, and they're anchored 5 kilometers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grimwood. Patrick Weiler of the Liberal Party.
The climate emergency is the biggest threat that we face today, and the transition to a clean economy is the biggest economic opportunity we're going to face in our lifetime. The Conservative Party has an economic plan but no environmental plan. The Green Party has a climate plan but no economic plan. The Liberal Party is the only party that has a plan to grow the economy while protecting the environment and fighting climate change. We're going to do this through our pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change, which puts a price on carbon, historic investments in public transit, energy efficiency, zero-emission vehicles, and renewable energy. And we're going to build on this, and we're going to do that by cutting corporate taxes in half for renewable energy and clean technology companies, and this is going to massively scale up. We're going to be able to build on companies like carbon engineering that are going to provide the jobs of the future and build on some of the great research institutions we have in this country.
Thank you very much. Next response goes to Judith Wilson of the NDP.
The NDP's plan involves a $15 billion fund to create 300,000 jobs in the green economy. This will be in building and transit in areas like ours, as well as in urban areas, retrofits of housing to bring them up to snuff, investments in solar and wind technology, investments in manufacturing for especially electric cars and all that infrastructure required. We're going to end offshore or subsidies to the offshore oil and gas industries and use the money for funding that kind of ambitious program. We will also retrain and transition workers who are affected by changes in the oil and gas industry and who are now having to move to a different kind of energy future.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wilson. Doug Webb of the People's Party.
Bev, thanks. We're all about small government and the sanctity of individual rights. And we agree actually with the NDP that we should cut subsidies to oil. We should cut subsidies to all companies and put that money to work for people in Canada. One thing that the climate debate is correct about is that the demographic here tonight will end up paying for this one way or the other. So you really need to make sure that you get the decision correct. There's great costs, impacts on affordability, and if it's not paid for today, it's going to be paid by you people, younger people, further down the road. So I just would caution you to make sure that you look at all sides of this debate so that the decision is made in your own best interests, looking to the future. And there are two sides to it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Gordon Jeffrey of the Rhinoceros Party.
I echo previous sentiments that I think we should remove subsidies for fossil fuels. I think any industry should survive or fail based on its own merit and profitability. I'm unwilling to commit to necessarily anything else at this time without properly consulting my constituents so as to best represent them.
Thank you very much. The last comment on this goes to Gabrielle Loren of the Conservative Party.
We all want a clean environment, not only for ourselves, but our children and generations of Canadians to come. But it's a complex global problem that we need science-based decision-making to attack. We need to attack this locally by stopping dumping sewage into our oceans, enforce laws on derelict boats, stop using single-use plastics, and improve our homes with the Green Home Tax Credit. Nationally, we need to incentivize green innovation, punish the corporate emitters, harmonizing recycling programs across Canada, and cutting down on excessive packaging. Globally, we need to make Canada the leader in green technology, which we can export to other countries to attack this global problem on a global scale.
Thank you very much. The next question, first response will be given to Patrick Weiler. How would your party increase the availability of affordable childcare?
So the plan is to create 250,000 new childcare spaces across the country. I think this is going to go a long ways to helping make life more affordable for families. We're focused on reducing the cost of that by 10%. So this is in addition to the other programs that we have for families, including Canada Child Benefit, like I said, which has actually raised 300,000 children across the country out of poverty, and 900,000 people overall. And I think we need to be making life more affordable for families because, that's just critical for everybody. In addition to that, we're focusing on bringing in more parental leave that will be available, and in particular as well for families that are adopting. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Judith Wilson.
The NDP has rolled out a universal child care program, which is meant to be priced at $10 a day to make it possible for women especially to be able to enter the workforce that have been unable to because of low-wage jobs. So the fact is we are going to have to work really hard on this because there's a huge shortage of licensed daycare spaces. And so there's going to have to be, along with it, ramping up a major training program to put in place more licensed daycare centers and people to staff them.
Thank you. Doug Bebb.
Well, affordability. So I said before, why then do the Conservatives continue with the government-imposed cartels that keep the prices of dairy, poultry, and eggs artificially high to control the production, banning of imports, price fixing, and the prevention of competition in the market? According to the OECD, Canadian consumers pay $3.6 billion more every year, a financial burden of $339 annually on the poorest 20% of Canadian households. The dairy and poultry cartels introduced by Pierre Trudeau are a good example of bipartisan corruption, both because legacy parties are continually paid off. Neither will move against the cartels. If either the Conservatives or the Liberals actually cared about the interest of ordinary Canadians, supply management would have been eliminated long ago. A People's Party of government will eliminate supply management and work to improve affordability in many other areas.
Thank you. Gordon Jeffrey from the Rhino.
Order, please. I promised honesty, so I must confess I didn't realize this was such an issue until I saw friends and constituents marching about this issue down in Squamish. So I currently have no plan to address this issue. However, I will have an open door policy. I will answer your emails personally, and I will come up with a great plan if this is something that the people of our riding need. Thank you.
Thank you. Gabrielle Loren.
One of the things that I learned at an early age was actually because my mom owned a daycare center. It was run as a licensed daycare with ECE teachers. When I became an accountant, one of the things that I looked at was daycare centers, and I was surprised to find that in the Tax Act, any business can have a daycare that supplies tax-free daycare to their employees as a tax-free benefit. What I question now is, why do we not have more companies that are allowing and setting up daycares in their businesses to not only attract employees, but to retain them? One of the things I found is that one company can do it, but not a lot. So I'm looking at advocating for doing group daycares for a number of companies that can get together and provide the daycare their staff need.
Thank you.
Dean Taylor.
Yes, to begin with, this is a complicated issue at one level and very simple at another. The Green Party believes that there should be a federal children's advocate to ensure that children's rights are protected. And there are far too many children in care right across not only child care for parents of children, but children in care. Therefore, one of the things we support is universal child care across the system because it's viewed as a ramp to equality for women in the workplace. A starting point for doing so would recognize that my own experience, when this emerged in one of the local papers in Squamish as a critical issue, it's keeping people, predominantly women, from employment because they don't have adequate care. Access to adequate care, nor is it available, and there's transportation to get to it. It's a high priority for us to address it. We need to dig into it deeper, work with the provinces and providers of the services, and with the Children's Advocate to address it, we should be able to make progress.
Thank you. Terry Grimwood.
Canada Fresh believes that we need more children. We need to grow our population. We're supporting incentives for families to grow. There should be a minimum wage for parents if they're going to stay home and look after their children. I sort of peg it at the $15 minimum wage. That's $2,400 a month for a young lady or a young man to stay home and raise their children for a few years. In addition to that, our seniors need to get the same. We have seniors on the coast that pensions don't come to $2,400 a month. I'm not supposed to do that, but I slipped it in. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Terry Grimwood. So the question is this. Do you support some form of proportional representation, and if so, what steps should be taken by the federal government to see it implemented?
The New Democratic Party supports a mixed-member proportional representation system. I heard Jagmeet Singh announce that the current position of the party is that we would not be looking at a referendum. We would be looking at a cooperative process within Parliament to make sure that we got consensus on the approach that we were going to take and then move forward from there. But mixed-member proportional representation is our position.
Thank you. Doug Bebb.
I think it was Winston Churchill who said that democracy is the worst political system possible, except for all the rest. And there is no perfect solution to this. The matter was put before the BC voters recently, and they turned down proportional representation. There are problems in Europe where they have this extensively, where they have fragmented coalition governments that are always falling and being changed over. The People's Party has no particular position on the matter, although it is clear that it does favor small parties, and so we see why the Greens and the NDP would be in favor. It would probably benefit us as well, but we have no policy on the matter, and I can't answer any more than that.
Thank you. Gordon Jeffrey.
This has been a cornerstone of my campaign. I absolutely support electoral reform. I personally support a hybrid system allowing for regional representation with ridings as well as additional seats in the House for proportional representation. I think it's an absolute tragedy that people have to feel they have to pick between the lesser of two evils, or they're throwing their vote away. You're still voting for evil. I refuse to do that anymore. And it's been proven to us that neither of the parties that keep passing the ball back and forth are capable of honest change. They have things gerrymandered quite well for them. They cannot be trusted to do anything that's in the best interest of the people and not their own pocket.
Thank you. Gabrielle Loren.
When you have a parliamentary system that is not acting the way it's supposed to, we have a problem. We are supposed to be electing the best member of parliament for every part of our ridings across the country, and based on who those best members are, that is our prime minister. Instead, what we're finding is that we are electing our prime minister and then resulting with the applicable member of parliament. What I think we are sick and tired of is the polarization of politicians who do have more than the best interests of their riding at heart. And maybe that's the problem. We should have members of parliament who are a little bit more middle of the road, who understand the left and the right, and will do what's best for the riding.
Thank you. Mr. Dana Taylor.
Yes to proportional representation. The Green Party would indeed support it. We would elevate that to one of the highest priorities as part of an overall plan to transform government, reclaim our democracy, and put in place accountability and in order that we could better operate a government that lives up to and speaks by the people who support it. The GPC also supports electing a government that will keep its word to deliver public proportional representation, to keep its word to take action on climate change, and not wait 4 years before it perpetuates its previous lies and attempt to get elected one more time. And proportional representation will enable government to be held to account to ensure all promises are kept.
Thank you. Mr. Terry Grimwood.
It's time to stand up. As I traveled across Canada, I met a lot of independent candidates that have run historically. There was an elderly man in Manitoba in St. Francis Xavier in Manitoba. And he has, I think, the best idea for Canadians to vote. If you look at the 7 of us up here, who's your first choice? Who's your second choice? Who's your third choice? Who's your fourth choice? The first person to get 50% of the vote is your candidate. When I ran in South Burnaby in February of this year against Mr. Singh and the other parties, less than 11% of the vote determined the candidate.
Thank you, Mr. Grimwood. Patrick Weiler.
I think there's a lot of ways we can improve our democracy, and I know over the last 4 years there was a really in-depth consultation on this very issue, because I participated in the consultation that took place at the WAS Center in Vancouver. There's a lot of different systems that were talked about, mixed member proportionate, proportional representation, single transferable vote. I think a lot of them have different pros and cons for each of them. One of the challenges with proportional representation and even mixed member proportionate is the size of the ridings it would require you to create. And even knowing the size of this riding, it's quite difficult, it's quite diverse, and I have some concerns about that. The effort was to try to find consensus on the approach. And so it's been interesting to hear the NDP mention that. Because I know at the end of this process, the Liberal Party had a couple systems they were focused on: single transferable votes and ranked ballot. The NDP was focused on mixed member proportionate. Because we couldn't come to an agreement, it didn't move ahead. So I think it's easier said than done.
So this will be our last question before the intermission, and the first response goes to Mr. Bepp. The question is, how will you support the Truth and Reconciliation agreements with First Nations?
Well, we'll support it.
Okay, no further comment. Mr. Gordon Jeffrey, the Renouncers Party.
Again, I have a policy of full disclosure, and I'm not very familiar with these policies, but it is very refreshing to finally hear a question pertaining to Indigenous peoples. This is the fourth debate, I believe, and it's the very first question pertaining to that topic. So I really wish I was more knowledgeable, and gosh, I feel like I'm letting my native friends back home in Whistler down right now, but yeah, I can't speak to it because I'm not familiar with those particular things.
Thank you. Gabrielle Loren.
The Conservative Party supports reconciliation process with the Indigenous peoples, but it's going to make real hard, measurable improvements in the lives of Canadians. We need to make those improvements. But you can't have a lasting reconciliation without economic reconciliation. So we've got some things to do here, but it's all doable. But at some point we have to say, we come up with a solution and we stick with it. We can't continue going back and forth. We have to make a decision and decide what's best for all of us. The economics are shown just in Seychelles alone with what the band has done with their lands, and I'm pretty proud of it.
Mr. Dana Taylor. The Green Party supports building a new relationship with Indigenous persons, consulting with Indigenous peoples to determine when and where to repeal the Indian Act, to conclude to create a Council of Canadian Governments, including Indigenous First Nations as well as municipalities with provinces and the feds, to consult Indigenous leadership, recognize that Indigenous leadership is critical to the climate goals of Mission Possible, to fully conform to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Persons, to implement calls to action on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and calls of the report of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women, to correct the boil water advisories on First Nations, to remove the 2% funding cap on Indigenous post-secondary education, and to ensure that all treaty and land claim negotiations respect and honor the inherent sovereignty and title of Indigenous persons.
Terry Grimwood.
47 years ago, I was elected to the North Vancouver City Council as a university student. I was then re-elected, and during that tenure, I was able to work with the local Native population. I wrote a paper for university at the time, and I recommended that all the Native lands should be incorporated as municipalities. If that had been done 47 years ago, we would be in a totally different world today. They would all be getting funding the way the municipalities and cities and districts are funded across the country. But they're not incorporated, and they don't get the funding. They don't have the funds to fight forest fires and things like that. They just don't have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Weiler.
I'm so glad that we finally got a question on this, because this is the first time in the 8 debates we've had that this has come up. And I was actually just talking to the Chief and Council of the Seychelles Nation today about this, because I think it's so important that we have a real plan to improve the nation-to-nation relationship with First Nations. And no government's done more to improve that relationship than the Liberal government over the last 4 years. It really starts from building trust and respect when you're engaging with First Nations. And I know this because I've worked as an Aboriginal lawyer. I've worked for the Squamish First Nation and other First Nations throughout the province on Aboriginal rights and title cases. So we do have a lot more work to be done, but there's been some amazing progress that's been done. We've eliminated 81 boil water advisories across the country, and we've really modernized the way that we're going to do the treaty process with First Nations. We have to recognize inherent jurisdiction as a starting point, and once we have that, First Nations don't need to prove their prior occupancy in those areas.
Thank you. Judith Wilson.
If there's one thing that has happened in this election, during the period of this election, that has made me shamed by our country, it was the action or hearing that the Liberal government intends to appeal the decision of the Human Rights Tribunal that was to provide compensation to the victims, the victims of racism, the children who did not receive family services that they should have received. It was shameful, and it was shameful to hear again that Mr. Scheer was going to do the same thing. This is an important decision of the Human Rights Tribunal. It makes a huge difference, and I'm shamed as a Canadian to have heard that this decision by the Liberal government. So we have a choice. We can do something about that. Don't vote for them. This is not truth and reconciliation. Truth and reconciliation means enshrining into law those recommendations. Truth and reconciliation means taking the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and making that law in this country, and then following it, and putting the shameful chapter in our history of poor treatment of our Native people.
Well, everyone, I'd like to thank our candidates. You can tell they're working really hard up here. This is the shortest time frame they've been given to answer questions, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. Let's give them a round of applause. And with that, we're going to move into our intermission. It's going to be 15 minutes, so you can refresh yourselves, take a walk outside, mingle with the candidates, or check in with your children. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. So the first question of the second round is going to go to Gordon Jeffrey. And that question is, what funding and services would your party dedicate to mental health care and addiction treatment?
Due to the time constraints, I'm going to focus on the opioid crisis. I think we should adopt, I believe it's Sweden's system. Prohibition of any substance doesn't work. That's been proven time and again over the last 100 years. We can have the government produce clean heroin so cheaply that we can easily undercut the black market while still providing enough funding for not only clean injection sites, but mandatory counseling. This system has been wildly successful.
Thank you. Gabrielle Lorraine.
Mental health is a very serious problem that the Conservatives are committed to taking action on. Having sat on the Lionsgate Hospital Board for the last 6 years and being part of the group that got the Hope Centre up and running, this is an important issue that is not to be ignored. Our previous Conservative government made significant investment to help address the issue and encourage a dialogue with all those affected to find solutions. In addition, the government created Mental Health Commission of Canada to provide funding of $240 million. Our previous Conservative government also allocated $5.2 million to support research and treatment of depression with a focus on suicide prevention. We are very committed to making sure that not only healthcare for mental, healthcare on the mental spectrum is dealt with, but also for those affected with any sort of opioid crisis, any sort of issues that people have.
Thank you, Ms. Loren. Dana Taylor.
Specifically, that we would negotiate the Canada Health Accord to prioritize the expansion of mental health and rehabilitation services, reduction in wait times, and reduction in wait times to all health services. I worked with in the construction industry recently with the opioid crisis because the crisis itself impacted the construction industry far more than any other sector. Close to 25% of all deaths happen to be tradespeople in the trades. Working with the Fraser Health Authority recognized that we were dealing with a poison issue, not necessarily an addiction issue. So all of the issues that made to start to focus our attention on that aspect of it, we could start to search for solutions. But connected to that was the mental health aspect that brought people to be using those drugs to begin with, and as well as a painkiller, first of all, accessing a poison as a result.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Terry Grimwood.
I'm not going to repeat what everybody else has already said, because I respect Gordon, and I respect what the others have contributed. In my lifetime, I was building yachts in North Vancouver for several years, and I had a workforce 80 strong. And in the few years that I was doing that, I lost 3 employees to heroin overdoses. What I'd like to share with you tonight is that I'm a real psychology buff, and I just, personality disorders and all those things that we recognize south of the border. My name starts with a T too, so just be careful. But there's a psychology book out there called Thinking Fast and Slow. You have to read it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grimwood. Patrick Weiler.
I think when we're talking about increasing mental health care and fighting addiction, it starts with giving the provinces more money to address these issues. And Because it is a provincial responsibility, the Liberal government is committed to raising the amount that we're transferring to provinces for healthcare by 3% every year. So that's going to make a huge difference. And on top of that, we have a plan to roll out $11 billion over the next 10 years, specifically to fight mental health issues. So we think on top of those two things together are going to make a big dent in this. Talking about the opioid crisis, that's one of the biggest crises we need to face today. Seems to be swept under the rug with a lot of the other issues that we're dealing with. But we really need to focus on this as a health issue more than as a criminal law issue. And the way that we've done this is we've devoted $350 million to set up 41 safe injection sites across the country, and that's going to make it at least safer for people that are in those situations.
Thank you, Mr. Weiler. Judith Wilson.
Well, talk about swept under the rug. The Liberal Party has been in power for the last 4 years, and we have not seen the opioid crisis treated as the public health emergency that it is. The money that he's talking about putting into mental health services and the decriminalization of the drugs that are behind it are the things that need to happen, should have already happened, and so that's going to have to be the priority for moving forward as we go on into the next government.
Thank you. Doug Bebb.
Well, the opioid crisis is an absolute tragedy, and it affects many of us at a very personal level in our families. The approach of the People's Party is slightly different than what's been going on so far. What we propose to do is to take the entire revenue collected by the GST and send that back to the provinces for funding health care. The problem, of course, is that when the money comes from wrong side, sorry. So when the money flows from the Fed to the provinces, they don't have to spend it necessarily on health care. It goes into general revenue. So this funding has to also increase at the provincial level, and that will be probably at GST. It's about $40 million a year collected at GST, and that will be sent back to the provinces for health care.
Thank you for that. Gordon Jeffrey. Oh, sorry. My apologies. So the next question, the first response will be going to Gabrielle Wren. The question is, do you agree there is an increased need to provide low-income, cooperative, subsidized, transitional housing opportunities for the growing number of homeless community members residing on the Sunshine Coast? And if so, how will you address this?
When you're looking at a place where you don't have a roof over your head and a place to put your head that's safe, yes, it's a priority. It can't not be a priority. When the housing strategy was released by the Conservatives to say surplus federal lands would be used to be able to be used for rental and other housing, that included the low-income housing for those who need it the most. But there's more than homeless people who need housing. There's also the seniors who are in low income, they need housing, as well as care homes and facilities where they can't take care of themselves. This is a crisis not only on the Sunshine Coast, but all throughout this riding. We need to take steps now to make sure that everyone is protected.
Middle class.
Thank you. We appreciate no heckling. Please, thank you. We're trying to maintain decorum. Dana Taylor.
As previously mentioned, the Green Party supports a complete review of the CMHC housing mandate, and the purpose of which would be to reactivate some programs that deal specifically with co-ops, co-housing, and some options that way. I visited earlier this year the co-housing project, one of the co-housing projects here in Roberts Creek, and impressed by that as an alternative to make that available. In terms of emergency housing, all areas affected across this riding, particularly Worcester, Squamish, Pemberton, and certainly the Sunshine Coast. Emergency housing has to be added in, and transitional housing, one by which is kind of a bridge between that may serve as temporary worker housing, but has to migrate towards that, what we stated earlier, is permanent housing, affordable housing, secure housing. You're not going to be booted out of that. Something better than the dump and flea bags that are being offered on the market today for most people at exorbitant prices that no one can afford without a tremendous income.
Thank you. Chair Grimwood.
Canada Fresh has the hub program. We're proposing 400 hubs across the country. 50 to 100 kilometers apart. And those hubs will support people that are homeless. It'll give them an opportunity to homestead. It'll give them an opportunity on a daily basis to have a shower, have a safe place at night if the weather is inclement. I think Canada needs to, this is a federal election. It's not about the Sunshine Coast or the Sea to Sky Highway or West Vancouver. It's about Canada. We need a Canadian program that addresses the homeless people. Without that, you're going to have everybody coming to the Sunshine Coast. Thank you.
Patrick Weiler.
So I'd absolutely be in support of more cooperative housing. We need to start looking at a lot of innovative solutions to fight the housing challenges we're facing today. I was also today at the cooperative housing right here in Roberts Creek, and I think that's an interesting model we could look at for a lot of other areas. Although it is quite expensive there, it's not really based for low-income housing, and it's been like there's a lot of red tape to get involved in that. So I think we need to find some creative solutions. There is a $200 million housing innovation fund. Specifically for those type of innovative solutions. I think other areas we can look at are things like laneway houses, tiny homes, and I think even working with the existing housing stock that we have. There's a lot of times there's single people living there. There might be an opportunity to have cooperative housing within existing households, and that's something I'd fight for and work with the provincial government, with municipal governments to find some creative solutions like that.
Thank you. Judith Wilson.
If I'm your member of parliament, I'm going to be in this riding asking for the members of the community to work with me on a plan for the homeless people in our riding. And then I will aggressively go after whatever money is out there in terms of housing to find some money to support them on a transitional basis. And if there isn't any money, then I'm going to be turning to you and our community to figure out some creative ways. There are people sleeping in the woods. There are people who don't have an address and so can't vote, even though they could use the food bank as their address. That's government policy right now for people who are homeless. You get to vote by giving the food bank as your address. That's our policy. Well, that's not good enough. And I think that we can work together as human beings to extend the hand to the people in our community who need our help. But that requires some leadership, and I would certainly use my office to coordinate that activity.
Thank you. Doug Beck.
Housing shortage is a matter of supply and demand. So what we have to do is decrease the demand and increase the supply. And one way to decrease demand is to cut back in immigration from 100 to 150,000. And that will also reduce medical wait times. It will reduce school overcrowding. And then the other demand offshore is the money that comes into the casinos. It comes in as a kind of an offshore bank account where people buy houses offshore, they leave them empty, and then people here have no place to live. The other thing we can do is to give you a tax cut. After the budget's balanced, it'll be a substantial tax cut, and that'll increase affordability for people living in Canada. Close to a minute, please.
Thank you. Gordon Jeffrey.
So we've already discussed housing. This is for interim housing and facilities for homeless people, correct? Yeah. I'm not aware of what's out there at the moment, so I have no direct comment towards that, but I do know that these types of facilities are often not in alignment with the needs, safety related or otherwise, of those they are targeted towards. But whatever is done, they absolutely need to be included in that consultation process to avoid wasted effort. And I do believe it's quite rich that the Liberal thinks we should be living in tiny homes. How tiny do you think his home is?
For our next question, the first respondent will be Dana Taylor. And the question is as follows. How would you address the increasing concerns over the current condition of Highway 101 and the lack of accessible, sustainable modes of transportation in the area?
I do know and understand that the highway has been an issue for some time. I read the signs; they seem to be obliterated by the political ones for now. But I think the solutions, the true solutions, lie in increasing overall mass transit for the area, to improving the bus and ferry service at both ends, to modernizing the system and ensuring regular public transit on the route. and possibly down the road, since the highway is, and highways generally belong to the provincial government, the feds, the best they can do is perhaps assist with routing and perhaps bridges along the way. So I see that very much, but the focus has to be mass transit, public transit, regular routine service, and getting across the water in a timely manner to ensure people can navigate this entire area by public means.
Thank you very much. Terry Grimwood. Yes. How would you address the increasing concerns over the current condition of Highway 101 and the lack of accessible and sustainable modes of transportation in the area?
We need alternative roads on the coast. We can't just rely on the highway out the door here. It doesn't have to be a 4-lane highway. We just need ways of getting through geographical areas as a stepping stone. If there's an accident in Davis Bay, a lot of times you can get around it by detouring, but there's many areas on the coast where you can't detour, and those roads are not major roads. They need to be built now. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Weiler.
So I think after probably the two biggest concerns I've heard people raise with me are we need more ferry service and we need a new highway on the Sunshine Coast. We have a 12-year, $180 billion infrastructure investment plan. So far there's been about 700 projects and $28 billion of that's been spent within BC, a lot of which is in this riding as well. And I think we have a long ways to go because we still have a huge infrastructure gap in the country, in this riding specifically. And $17 million that's being spent on upgrading the Langdale terminal so passengers can load while cars are loading. That'll create the opportunity for at least one more sailing. But I think the problem with the highway here is while these funds are available, it's not being prioritized with the provincial government. So I'd be happy to work with the provincial government, make the case for that, in addition to making the case for more public transit. I think we need a lot more of that here on the coast and to serve a bunch of areas that aren't yet served.
Thank you, Mr. Weiler. Judith Wilson.
I would like to see the focus firstly on transit because right now it's just not available for a lot of the coast. There are many innovative programs that we can have a look at in the world to deal with communities like ours, which has many buses serving small communities, reaching over to the ribbon highway that we deal with. And a better transit system would reduce traffic on the roads. Right now, if you work at the mill, there is no bus that goes out there. Talk about crazy. So if we're going to be looking at electric cars, we still do need to fix the highway and we need to put more infrastructure dollars into that. And I agree that it's a provincial responsibility that we're going to have to work with the government on. Thanks.
Mr. Doug Bebb.
Well, I think the extension of the highway off the ferry slip straight up to Half Moon Bay at least makes great sense. I know there's at least one group here working on that, trying to advocate for it, and I think they should put pressure on the provincial government to make that happen. Beyond that, I'm well aware that there's not adequate transport up here. The minibus suggestion actually makes good sense. Where it would run, I guess, not too sure, at least as far as seashells. And I know that up the Earl's Cove also, Pender Harbor has no transport. And maybe, as was suggested by somebody here I talked to earlier, Uber might be a solution for people.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon Jeffrey.
I've been a vocal supporter of public transportation in general in my campaign. I think if the highway is in disrepair, obviously we should repair it. I can fill a pothole. I took the 90 Express yesterday and it was so packed I could hardly breathe. So yes, I imagine you could use another bus or two.
Okay. Gabrielle Loren.
I think all the things that we've heard so far are awesome ideas. And I think that's where I always question why parties are always saying, no, it's my way or the highway, or in this case, Highway 101, not going anywhere. This is a perfect example of some great ideas that I'd love to participate in and hear from not only the other members here, but also from you. We don't need bus transit that's linked to the ferries. Because unfortunately, for some reason, they don't think we need the bus any other time. I always wondered about that one. It's like, really? You only think I want to go to Trail Bay? I think I want to go a little bit farther. So yes, I totally agree. We need transit, we need more of it. We need to take our transit to the point that we are walking away from our goat trail.
Thank you very much. So the next question, first response goes to Terry Grimwood. And the question is this: the majority of young adults within our riding are forced to pursue post-secondary education elsewhere. How would you make post-secondary education more affordable and accessible on the Sunshine Coast?
Canada Fresh believes in free education for all Canadians, regardless of age. We have the university in Sechelt, and it should be 4 times the size. I don't see, when I came to the coast in 2000, I had to make a decision whether I was going to go back to university or whether I was going to come up here and build houses and do different things. But I'm very pro-education. I've had many vocations in my lifetime, and I'm constantly learning. So I'm very supportive of putting money into education in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Weiler.
I think we need to do everything we can to support young students. They're going to be the future of this country. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that when they're coming out of university, they're not going to be saddled with major debts. And the way that we're going to address this is we're going to increase the Canada Student Grant. We've already increased it by $1,000. We're going to increase it by another 40%. This is going to make education much cheaper for people, but we're also going to make sure that people don't actually have to pay back any of their student loans until they're making at least $35,000. And if they have any kids up to the age of 5, they're not going to be paying it until they're past that age. But I think we also need to look at ways that we can set up new education opportunities on the Sunshine Coast. I had a meeting recently with Michael Jackson of the Pod Center. I think that would be an amazing idea to create a new educational center here, so we can have people that can stay here and learn here, rather than graduate at 18 and then maybe just move away from the coast.
Thank you. Judith Wilson.
The New Democratic Party thinks it's time we got rid of tuition fees to our post-secondary institutions. We need to start with getting rid of student loans, replacing them with grants, and then expanding the whole idea of education is not just something that you do once you finish with high school, but it's a lifelong learning process. We want to make it possible for people who are in a job they want to transition away from, need to go and get some further education, to be able to draw EI benefits while they go to school, and to not have it taken away from them. So there are many things we can do, and yes, I would like to see more support for the university up here so more programs could be offered. Things like training for legal secretaries, for example, they have to go to North Vancouver to get part of their training. So there's a lot of things that can be done up here that currently aren't. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Doug Bebb.
Well, the satellite model seems to be a good idea. If there's demand for post-secondary stuff up here, either vocational or academic. They've done that, some satellite stuff downtown Vancouver through BCIT, and also there's satellite ones around Prince Rupert out of UNBC in Prince George. So that might be one solution if there's adequate demand for it up here. All right, thanks.
Mr. Gordon Jeffrey.
Well, it would be easy to pander to recent graduates and say that I support erasing debt arbitrarily. I honestly believe if you enter into an agreement, you're giving your word and you ought to keep it. The process may sound silly, but you'll find the process rewarding. I believe education should be free, though, to keep institutions from being run like businesses, you know. The primary focus should be educating our youth and challenging them and exposing them to new ideas, not extracting every penny from them or and not setting the bar low so as to make sure that their dollars return the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I turn this over to Ms. Loran, I just want to remind the candidates that the orange placard indicates 30 seconds and the pink 30 seconds, so I just noticed some people were cutting their answers short. I just wanted to let you know that again. So, Ms. Loren.
Capilano University already has a satellite branch here. Having university costs covered, as some of the other proposals we've heard today, is great. But unfortunately, that's not the only cost of a post-secondary education. With a son in university right now and a daughter just having finished, the cost of university is beyond the tuition fees. It's the books, it's the living expenses, it's everything else that goes along with the education side of things. They have to live on their own, have places to sleep, etc. With the RESP increase in the grant that the Conservative government is proposing, a contribution of $1,000 to your child's education will be topped up by the government by $300. That money can be used for anything for post-secondary education. Thank you.
Thank you. Dana Taylor.
The Green Party believes in education, therefore we support a program of free lifetime education for tuition. We also, in our platform, is to forgive all student loans, Canada student loans over $10,000. And with the belief that that's necessary because the greatest burden for young people entering the workforce very often is their loan. With respect to local training, support local training, I've worked for 30 years with the ITA Industry Training Authority at the provincial level for skills training, and there are pilot projects going on in various locations around the province working with industry, private sector, to bring specifically trades training, but it can apply to anything that's provided through the community college system on a similar basis. That is available now, it's being tried, it could be brought to any location in the Sunshine Coast or elsewhere.
Thank you. So the next question, the first response will go to Patrick Weiler. And the question is, how do you plan to balance industrial projects and environmental health and sustainability in our riding?
I think the way that we do this is through properly assessing projects before they're implemented. And as an environmental lawyer, I have experience working under the HARPA-era environmental laws and been incredibly frustrated with how it keeps all of the really important voices out except for the proponent. I worked for First Nations. It treated consultation with First Nations really as a box-checking exercise, and for that reason, we never had a proper assessment of projects. It also meant that good projects couldn't go ahead. The Liberal government recently brought in the Impact Assessment Act, which completely modernized the way that we look at projects, which made the process much more open so people can participate, and that we actually are considering things like the climate change impacts that could happen from a project. And making sure we're also bringing back things like having fisheries impacts look at. And I think it's so important that we have systems that work, because when we don't have systems that work, it breeds distrust, and that makes things very divisive. So we need to have a proper process.
You. The next question goes to Judith Wilson. And it's the same question. How do you plan to balance industrial projects and environmental health and sustainability in our riding?
Well, I'd like to see some industrial projects. That would be good. I mean, a few more jobs would be very helpful for our community. Certainly, when we do put together in this riding various projects, we do need to involve the people who are going to be affected by it, as well as those people who are going to make a profit from it. And we have, seen lots of times where projects get done, and then we find that there are environmental impacts afterwards that were not taken into account. So that's the kind of thing that we are going to have to, in the future, take a lot better care in terms of the planning process. The changes that I see that are possible will only come about if our community works together on these things at the municipal and the regional level, because we are dealing with cross jurisdictions in provincial matters, often with the federal jurisdictions, and these are things that cannot be done without a huge amount of cooperation.
Thank you.
Well, I agree. I think that we need some more industrial projects, and I think that's the way for people to make a good living. And whatever is going on now just isn't working, is it? We've got all sorts of things stalled in court cases, challenges, second guessing. It just become a total mess. And all we hear about is we'll change the Evaluation Act, we'll change the consultation stuff. We need to have a system that's well-defined, in place, everybody can understand, and as an end point, in a reasonable time frame, consulting everybody, yes, but no more of this ongoing court challenges and indeterminate stuff. We need to get some stuff moving in this country and on the coast here as well.
Thank you. Gordon Jeffrey.
How would I balance them? What an absurd question. I would not. I would prioritize the sustainability and environment factor there and force the industrial projects to work within that framework. And specifically, I really think industrial dumping needs to be addressed. If you look into the fines, they're pathetically low, and it's often much cheaper just to roll the dice and dump things inappropriately rather than go through the proper methods. So I think those fines need to be increased at least tenfold.
When you're looking at balancing an industrial project with the environment, you have to make sure you get the experts in to tell us what the problem is with that project. How can you say, we're going to do this, if you don't even know what the impact is? And that boils down to not only consultation, but cooperation and bringing in those people who actually know what the hell they're talking about. Good example on that is our fishing industry. I was up in Pender Harbor today, and there is a number of fishermen saying, you know, we weren't even consulted when some changes were put through. And I thought, how often does that happen? Too often. And I think that's what we need to do, is when we're looking at making any sort of project, make sure we talk to not only the people involved, but the people involved, so that we're able to find out exactly what the issues are.
Thank you. Mr. Dan Taylor.
First of all, industry is often heard, and it is quite true, the friction comes from, friction and cost comes from the uncertainty. However, it also comes from an abuse of the process. We've witnessed the wood fiber LNG plant and the transportation system to support it and the refueling efforts for it. Witnessed the Trans Mountain Pipeline approval. Witnessed the change to the regulations for wood fiber to change the definition of seagoing vessels that store liquefied natural gas to calling them floating storage units, so they wouldn't have to meet the same seaworthiness requirements. Another action of the Liberal government. Or the application from Burnco, which thankfully so far has been rejected. Or fish farming and how it impacts our environment throughout. And of course the LNG plants themselves and what that will contribute to the area. We need what we need is a balance. We need the cooperation of all partners in this, and we need thorough investigation. But we need to set the standards high enough so that people can recognize that there are obligations in the system to support it.
Thank you. And the final word goes to Terry Grimwood on this question.
You can shorten me up 10 seconds. I support what everybody's been saying, but we need the money. I'm a businessman, and I've been paying 9% interest on my construction loans, and we need money, and we have the money. We have close to $1 trillion tied up in our pension funds. If we want business loans to be made in our community, we have to make the money available to the credit unions and the banks in our community to support initiatives in our own backyard. $1 trillion of Canadian saving funds, pension funds, are out there. And we should be able to generate returns of 10 to 20% on those funds invested in Canada. So, and things will be balanced.
Thank you, Mr. Grimwood.
We can balance our bank accounts.
Thank you, Mr. Grimwood. So this is the last question of the night before we move into closing statements from the candidates. This question is going to go to Judith Wilson for the first shot of answering, and then we'll move down the table as we have. And the question is, what actions and investments will your party take to stimulate rural economies such as the Sunshine Coast?
Well, as your member of parliament, if I'm elected and if I have an NDP government to work with, I'll be going aggressively to get some of the money that's out there for the development of the green economy that we absolutely must have. I'd like to see in this riding for us to have some of the development jobs around solar and wind power. I think there's no reason why we couldn't have participation in a lot of the manufacturing parts of things like wind power, for example. In order to get those kinds of things, we're going to need to have people in the riding working together in working groups to identify those areas that we would most like to be able to work on, and then pull it all together and then go after, make sure that we get our share of that money. Obviously, we're going to need to develop the housing initiatives that the party is calling for. If we're going to make a difference...
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Next, Doug Beth.
Thanks for the question. Absolutely, we need to grow our economy, and includes the rural economy. And unfortunately, Canada's business climate is less and less welcoming to investors. Canada is attracting less foreign direct investment. Government intervention in the economy is not the answer. The only two policy instruments available to government are taxes and regulation. Both impede economic growth and prosperity. We'll address both of those. Taxation, both corporate and also personal. A 2018 study of the University of Calgary found $14 billion worth of direct and indirect federal subsidies. Some of these measures may be worthwhile, but most create unfair market distortions. We're going to eliminate those subsidies to industry. It's going to open up new avenues for entrepreneurs, regionally and locally, to create new products.
Thank you, Mr. Beth. Gordon Jeffrey.
Admittedly, if I win, I'll most likely be the only member of my party, so my powers in general will be limited. But again, I will represent the interests of my constituents, you, the people. And specifically, just this evening, I was enjoying the best fish and chips of my entire life. And I read an article about how foreign interests and local, not local, but semi-local, shall we say, tourism was being given preferential treatments in fishing of salmon and other fish. And reading the article just broke my heart. So yeah, I would do away with that and make sure that Sharkies have all the salmon they needed.
Of course, we can all agree that Sharkies is amazing. Gabrielle Lorenz.
Gordon, you have great taste. It's amazing when you look through a question like that and you see that there's somebody who's already been talking about it for a while. The Sunshine Coast Community Foundation released their vital signs report and said that 25% of people who live on the coast are self-employed. Small business is so important to this economy, and as such, and as a small business owner myself and someone who's been doing tax accounting for the last 30 years for small businesses, I was thrilled to hear what the Conservative Party plan was. It includes taking away the tax on money left inside your corporation, allowing you the income split with your spouse, because I believe we're not tax cheats, but that we actually do have a role when we have spouses involved in our businesses. Reducing red tape, assigning someone that will actually help you with the Tax Act and making it easier to navigate.
Thank you, Ms. Sorrell. Danny Taylor.
First of all, I think in terms of we have three distinct agricultural areas in this riding, here in the Sunshine Coast, the Pemberton Valley, and significant areas in and around Squamish. I've met and talked to a number of farmers in the area. I participated in the slow food cycle in Pemberton this past summer. We encountered a number of different people in that riding. The Green Party supports regenerative agriculture, the move to eliminate the use of fertilizers and pesticides, to support the farm-to-table local food production, to enable that both organic and fresh food farming available locally, and then look at the distribution system to make sure that's possible. This would take away from a lot of the transportation required to move food around. When you are producing it in the area, you can make it available in the area. And furthermore, supporting community farming, which is already well developed here in the Sunshine Coast. A number of people I've met and encountered in the party itself are involved in this area and should be well supported.
Terry Grimwood.
Well, I take credit for introducing Gordon to fish and chips at Sharky's. So you can vote for that. I got a kick out of the fact that they were serving beer and wine tonight. It's us that needs to take the beer and wine before we come, but I'm sorry that we're forcing you to do the same. 10 years ago in Canada, the federal government loaned the 5 big banks $114 billion. We weren't told about it. It was a secret. How many of you knew about that? 3 people raised their hands. There's lots of secrets in Canada, and I'm the only candidate in this election federally out of 338 ridings that are telling you some of the secrets.
Thank you, Mr. Goodboy. Patrick Weiler.
So small businesses make up 98% of the businesses in this country. And the best way to stimulate more business is by lowering the taxes. So that's why we've lowered taxes on small businesses from 11 to 9%. This really creates the opportunities for a lot more small businesses to get ahead. It's already 70% of the people that are employed by the private sector are in those areas. But in terms of how I stimulate that on the coast, I think a great way of starting with that is engaging with the chambers. So I would commit to working with both the Sechelt and Gibson's chambers to finding what opportunities they think are best placed to succeed here. One of the things we first need to do before we're really going to be able to build the economy is addressing some of the affordability challenges. So things like creating more affordable housing is really critical, because when we can't get RCMP officers to move here because it's too expensive to live here, we have a huge problem. So in addition to that, there's going to be many opportunities in the clean energy economy. That's why we're cutting corporate taxes in half on them. We have, and we're going to really scale up the energy retrofits. So that's going to be a whole new industry here.
So we will be moving on. That's the end of our question and answer period. We'll be moving on now to closing statements, and we're going to do this in reverse to the way that we started. We started with Gabrielle Loren in the beginning of the night. For closing statements, we're going to start on our left with Gordon Jeffrey and move right across the stage. So Mr. Jeffrey, you have 1 minute.
Friends, we've heard a lot of pretty words here today. Some of them I almost believe. But we know what 3 of these parties really believe in, and it's anything but working together for Canada, like they claim. It's perpetuating a status quo that lines their pockets. It's playing on our fears to pass the ball back and forth. It's bailouts, nepotism, cronyism, the legalized bribery of pay-for-play politics and closed contracts, perversion of our justice system to take care of their corporate buddies, and disrespecting our House by endlessly avoiding direct questions on our dime. By contrast, I believe in true accountability, honesty, integrity, justice, privacy, and the will of the people. I've been spending my own money on this campaign and all of my time. I am the only one who has pledged to give 10% of my salary back to charities in this riding. I am fully committed to not only bringing accountability back to politics, but restoring your faith in democracy. Change starts with us, here and now. Don't vote for the lesser evil. Use your mind and follow your heart.
Thank you.
It feels great.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey.
Hello? Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. I prefer the older term. Pay to play is a new term. I think bribery and influence peddling the old terms are much more descriptive. Are you tired of the same old thing over and over from liberals and conservatives? They say anything to get elected because they lack values and they lack integrity. So how can you, as a voter, keep doing the same thing and expect a different result? The People's Party of Canada will reduce immigration, lower your taxes, and fight political correctness. A PPC government born of the grassroots movement sweeping this great land will get Canada back on track. No longer will profiteers be setting the agenda and crafting narratives to maintain a destructive status quo. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bebb. Judith Wilson.
Firstly, with your vote, tell the world that we are stepping up to the challenge of climate change and we are going to make those changes. Secondly, consider the shameful actions I spoke of earlier of the of Mr. Scheer and of Mr. Trudeau with respect to our Indigenous peoples. Tell the world that that is not who we are. We are the people that is embracing the changes that are necessary to make up for the difficulties of the Indigenous peoples that they are experiencing today. I ask you to send me to Ottawa. I ask you to let me stand on the shoulders of Jack Layton and Tommy Douglas to bring you the kind of country that we deserve and that we can do. We can do this together. In the words of Jack Layton, love is better than anger, hope is better than fear, optimism is better than despair, so let us be loving, hopeful, and optimistic, and we will change the world.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Patrick Weiler, closing statements.
Thanks everybody for making it out here today. I think this is such an absolutely critical election for all of us here. And for the first time ever, our generation, millennials, are the biggest voting bloc in the country. So we need to act like it, we need to get out there and vote, because the decisions that are made today, the decisions that are made in this election, we're going to have to live with for the rest of our life. So we need to get these things right. We need to fix the affordability crisis we have. We need to have a real plan to address climate change. This is what we have. And we need to grow the economy so that we're going to have the jobs that are going to sustain us well into the future. Now, this is going to be in the clean energy economy. It's a $2.5 trillion annual economy. We have a really strong plan to really take advantage of that. So I'm here to ask you to put your trust in me today, to be your voice in Ottawa, to make sure that we're going to be able to solve these issues, and to make sure you have a real voice that understands the issues that you're facing today, and is actually going to deliver real change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weiler. Very good work.
I'm a chess player. I've played maybe 20,000 hours in my lifetime. So I'm a very good chess player, and I have a new chess move. It has to do with our pension funds. I'm just can't let that go. How many of you know how much the president of our Canada Pension Investment Board makes? Anybody? I've got $100 for you. $5.25 million a year. We have a $500 million club in Ottawa, and those are all the other senior civil servants. This is obscene. As far as I'm concerned, it's corrupt, and it's greedy, it's money grabbing, it's, it has to stop.
Mr. Greenwood, you're up. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Traditional Canadian elections end up being about trading power positions, and the two parties, the Liberals and Conservatives, have shared that legacy over time. Today, and the Conservatives have two former MPs and a former West Vancouver mayor in their camp. The Liberals with one current MP and a former also a former West Vancouver mayor. Together, both parties are hiring students at $14 an hour to persuade people to move their vote from parties they might otherwise select. If you really want to vote strategically, vote Green. Give the Liberals a much-deserved vacation from their long history of running roughshod other people. In comparison, as a member of Parliament, I will respect your wishes and not be dictated to by the boardrooms of foreign-owned oil companies in Calgary, the banks in Toronto, or the too-big-to-fail transnationals in Montreal. Not only will our party transition the economy from fossil fuel to capture clean, renewable energy, but help restore integrity and transparency to Parliament and our threatened democracy. Thank you for your attention tonight.
Thank you very much. Gabrielle Loren, final word of the night.
The way I see Ottawa right now is a bunch of kids in a sandbox, and they're throwing sand at each other. And I'd just like to go there, smack them on the top of the head and say, well, let's just get together and build a sandbox. No, let me rephrase that. Let's build a castle. It gets to the point where you wonder why anyone would want to go into politics when they're fighting with each other all the time. When the real job is to not be more than a voice in Ottawa, but to actually have someone who will take action, get results, and be accountable. And I think no matter which party you vote for, that's what we should demand of our member of parliament. No matter who's part of our campaign team, no matter who's doing what, let's just pick the best person for the job who can work as a team to make this country great.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the question and answer portion of our period. And I want to thank everyone here for attending and sticking it out till the end. I think this is a fantastic event. From now, we're going to move into the Mingler, which is, we're going to basically have the doors open here until 10. You're welcome to get further drinks if you wish. But before we do that, I just want to remind you all that voting day is coming up, and don't miss the important opportunity to drop a ballot. Any elections office up until October 15th, 6 p.m. at your assigned polling station from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., October 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th, or at your assigned polling station 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., October 21st. So I invite you all to stick around, and I thank everyone for coming, and I thank Voice Lab for putting this on. Fantastic evening.